Hey, welcome back. Today I want to talk to you about a phrase and it's called don't count your chickens. So, the whole actual phrase in English is don't count your chickens before they've hatched. And what that means is don't come to conclusions before something is fully played out. Like, don't take stock of something before you have all the information. And so, a good policy I have found to have in life in general is never, ever take stock of anything. So, the human mind, our minds, always want to come to conclusions about things and take stock of things. And I'll give you an example of this. So, when we're in relationships, sometimes we feel the need rather to have a define the relationship conversation, right? Like if you're dating someone and you're not sure what's going on, you want to have a conversation to define the relationship. Or if someone conversely who you were seeing like ghosts you or they're acting weird and you're not talking to them anymore and they just sort of disappear, you'll hear this from your friends. They'll be like, I just didn't get any closure on that relationship, right? Like that's what your friend will say when someone ghosted her, or maybe you've said it yourself. And so they become obsessed with closure because there was no conversation. There was no, this is over conversation. But why do we do that? It's because the mind wants a safety net. It wants a cage. It wants to know what the parameters are. But the truth is that there is no cage. No relationship has a beginning or an end. Likewise, nothing has a beginning or an end. The idea of a beginning, middle, and end, like a linear line, is something the mind creates. But that's part of physical reality. So we are operating based on the time-space continuum, the fourth dimension, when we talk about time and space. But above the time-space continuum, in higher dimensions, there is no beginning and there is no end to anything because everything is happening here and now simultaneously. And that's just physics. So you, for example, are a soul. So the soul is above the time-space continuum. It's eternal. It's always here and now. And we access it in the present moment. But having a physical experience, the mind wants to create an illusion of time. So it will say there's a beginning and an end. Or a little bit more true to form, it will make a cycle out of things. So it will say beginning, cycle, end. And that's kind of like what astrology provides is cyclical time. That's also the way we view nature is cyclical. A birth, a life, a death. A year goes in seasons like that. And the linear time is really more man-made. It's calculating based on years and really anything, right? But even the clock time is cyclical, right? We go from morning to evening, back to morning again. But over the course of a lifetime, so a human lifetime is the linear. It's birth, middle age, death, about 100 years, if you're lucky. But the thing is that your soul is having multiple incarnations right now. So the thing that we define as a past life or a future life, there is no past or future as far as the soul is concerned. It's all happening now. And the whole reason that we are here in this physical incarnation is to focus. That's all that the ego is. It's just a mechanism to focus at a specific area. But there's no story that needs to be behind that. So if you kind of do this in your regular life, if you don't take stock of anything, if you don't tell your stories from the past, and you don't try to form conclusions about what a certain relationship was for, what the meaning was, what the purpose was, you don't know because you can't. You're actually not in control of it. The mind wants control, and that's why it's doing this. It wants a cage. But that's not you. You're a soul having multiple incarnations, probably an infinite amount of incarnations in physical bodies, different ones, all right now. And when that sinks in, it's very humbling. It's like, what do you mean I am actually something that sees beyond what's going on right here and now? I am something that is occurring in infinite amounts of bodies, at infinite amounts of time frames. It just means your soul is infinitely focused in different areas. And it's humbling because you realize, like, I am not what I thought I was. So if that's you, then what's the point of making up fake stories about why you had a relationship you had, or why you're in a current job that you have, or what the lesson is? You can't know, you'll never know. There's a good example of this that I want to give in literature. So many of you know Edgar Allan Poe, famous poet. He famously wrote The Raven, his most famous work, I would imagine, and it was groundbreaking. The Raven he created his own like rhyme scheme for it. The tropes in it, the symbolism was iconic. Everything about it, the whole thing was just new. And then after he wrote that, he wrote a composition about specifically how he used logic to write The Raven. And this has been a controversial piece of work where, like, future famous poets like T.S. Eliot, who was a modernist poet about 100 years later, and other experts in the field of literature, they read this composition and they were like, I call bullshit. That is not how he wrote his pieces. That is what he decided that he wanted to say afterwards. So many people believe that he was divinely inspired to write his works, and later he tried to justify his works through logic, through saying, I specifically, intentionally did this and this and this, and other people who were experts were like, no, he didn't. He didn't do that. So, I mean, it's mixed. Like, some people believe he did, but a lot of people believe that it was BS. And this is exactly how life works for us. So when we go into things, we don't actually have the intentions that we later place upon them. So oftentimes we tell a story later about why we chose a specific relationship or job or college, or why we moved to a certain place. But when it was happening, that's not the reason. That's the reason we imposed upon it later. And I'll give you another example in literature. Sorry, I went to college and I took English, so literary references. But another one is a famous poet by Robert Frost called The Road Not Taken. So this is the most misinterpreted and misunderstood poem in American literature, pretty much. Most people think that the poem is about someone who takes the road less traveled. It talks about a man who is come across two roads in a yellow wood. And sorry, I could not travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the other growth, and then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim because it was grassy and wanted wear. But as for that, the passing there had worn them really about the same. So this is a man who is actually, this is a very meta poem, because he is a man telling a story that happened to him, knowing that one day, as an older man, he will be lying about the story. So what's really happening in this poem is complete self-awareness of the human failing of the mind, because he knows exactly what happened. He looked at a path. He says it 3 times in the poem. They're the same. They don't matter. He's making an arbitrary decision to take one. And he says, oh, I kept the first for another day, but knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted that I should ever go back. So he has the wherewithal to know that he's going down one, and he is sort of saving the other one for some other time, but he's like, I'll probably never go. And that's how life goes. And then he says, oh, I'll be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. He knows one day, as an older man, he's going to romanticize this moment. And he's going to say, I took the one less traveled by, even though he says 3 times that they're both the same previously in the poem. So what he's saying is that he knows one day he's going to make this a story that it isn't. He's going to tell people he took the one less traveled by, even though they're both equal right now. He's going to make a story up so that he can make a meaning out of something that is actually meaningless. This is, and Frost actually had come out and said, like, this was just a poem that he sent to a colleague making fun of him. Actually, it was like a joke that he sent, and it became probably his most famous poem, but also the most misinterpreted, because people think it means take the road less traveled, go your own way. But that's just the meaning that they imposed upon it when it came out. It doesn't mean that. And so this is what human minds do. We will arbitrarily make a choice, and it's gut instinct, right? It's actually our soul making the choice. It happens through us, not to us. That's every experience you have is happening through you, not to you. But because the mind needs a sense of control and structure, it will tell a story about something. They say that hindsight is 20/20, and what that means is that the mind doesn't have any way of predicting or interpreting what's going to happen in the next moment, or the next moment, or the next moment. You actually have no idea what's going to happen the rest of your life. You could get hit by a car today and become a paraplegic. Not saying that I want that to happen, of course, but you could also find out that your spouse is cheating on you in a month and get a divorce, and you didn't have that in your mind's eye as something that was going to happen. The only thing we do when we think about the future is we're making predictions based on patterns that we can observe of the past. But what's really happening is that those patterns are also bullshit. They're the way the mind categorizes and catalogs the past so that it can try to predict the future, and it can't do either. It cannot clearly see what happened or what is happening because it lies about what happened. And this is why you should never bother making conclusions about something. The other reason is that it frees you up to realize that everything that is happening is never ending. So relationships never cease. You might have had a marriage with someone, or a relationship or a friendship, and then something happened where it stopped, which means that you stopped being legally connected, you stopped seeing each other every day. Maybe it was a colleague you had for many years, and then one of you left the job, and then you became more distant because you weren't seeing each other every day you were at work anymore. You stopped cohabitating with people, an old roommate you no longer live with. The relationship, the relating experience between them alters, right? But because space and time are an illusion, that interacting experience was mostly illusion anyway. So the proximity of space was not as, like, you didn't have the illusion of a lot of space before, when you were cohabitating, when you were married, when you were roommates, when you were coworkers. And now there is the illusion of space. But really what's happening is that you're just not focused on them anymore because they're not in your proximity. That's all that's happening. Relationships are never over. And if you're focusing on someone who isn't in your proximity, you are essentially trying to control something you can't control. So if you're thinking about someone and you're like, I just need conclusion. I need like to draw a conclusion. I need closure. I need to learn. I need to figure out what the lesson was with that person. What's happening is that you are zoomed in on something like a microscope. You're zoomed in with your focus, and it's no longer pertinent to you because it's not in your actual physical experience anymore. And what you need to do, the only thing you need to do is just zoom out, right? Gain that, stop looking through the microscope and now come back out. Like if you think about an astronaut looking at the world, you know, that's different than when a scientist is looking at atoms or something in a microscope. It's just perspective. It doesn't mean anything. The only thing it means, if you're focused on something and it is causing you enough strife, because that's what needing conclusions is, or needing a lesson, it's because you're in fear. The mind is messed up because it needs something. The only thing you need to do is zoom out and come back to what is in your physical proximity now. And it's nothing. Like, nothing's actually happening in your real life experience generally that is anything to be anxious about, unless a tiger is chasing you, which I learned recently. It's not going to help you to climb a tree or get into water. You're basically screwed if a tiger is going to chase you. But yeah, I mean, you actually don't even have hardly anything to stress about. It's all a story in here. And don't count your chickens. You never know how relationships are going to change. When you zoom out and you come back to presence and you stop focusing on something that isn't in your immediate environment, it often comes back into your immediate environment. It's like things only run from you because you're chasing them. When you stop chasing things, they don't have to run anymore. It's just resistance. When you stop resisting things by focusing in on them and diffuse back into a more soul level perspective, the soul is focused on infinite amounts of human experiences right now. They're all happening simultaneously. Time doesn't exist. So your little human life doesn't matter that much. It doesn't matter at all. There's no meaning. It's just for fun and focus. Focus itself doesn't mean good or bad. So we focus on these situations and we say that was good or that was bad. And the whole lesson we learn as humans is that, oh, it actually just meant that I was focused on it. The thing that the mind really doesn't like is that once it realizes that there's no conclusions to draw and that there's no lessons to be learned, everything is a choice. It's ultimate, absolute freedom. So what does that mean? It means that you've been making the choices to stay in your boxes your entire existence. It's really challenging for the mind to look back and realize that every dysfunctional relationship you stayed in too long wasn't because they were a narcissist or because you had to for the kids or because blah, 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 whatever it is, or because you were in love. Like, all of it was just a choice you were making. So you just continued to make that choice over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. And the whole time you were doing that, or you were staying in a job you didn't like, or a home you didn't prefer, or with friends that you really weren't jiving with, or studying something at school that you didn't actually like, the whole time you were free to do something else. And this is kind of jarring. This is actually part of the awakening, is having the awareness of being like, oh, snap, I could have chosen something else at any point. I chose suffering. I chose to stick it out. And there was no merit to that other than just keeping my focus on something. And that's a type of experience, but it's meaningless. You can zoom out and zoom in on something else and zoom out and zoom in on something else. And you can do that an infinite amount of times. Or you can stay zoomed in on one very specific thing. And if you do that, you miss out on all the rest of it. And there's no good or bad. There's no better or worse. It's just perspective. That's all it is. It's just physics. It's science. And that takes away a lot of what the feeler has to say about it, right? The feeler and the thinker are working in tandem to keep you in this illusion. So there's no meaning to it. You had an experience of being with someone, and the way that people continue to keep themselves in that experience is they keep telling the story over and over again about this illness they had, and or maybe still have, or this relationship they had, the people that can't stop, complaining about their ex or what they did to them or how they got away from that narcissist, or just telling their own victim story and their own story of whatever over and over again. It just keeps it going. It's like, zoom out already. Zoom out. It's all you have to do is just Come back to the present. There's no predator in the present. There's no narcissist in the room with you, and yet you keep telling the story about it. You know, your ex is living with somebody else now, and you're still telling the story of it. They moved on, they zoomed out and zoomed in on something else, and you didn't. The job, you know, and I understand, I've had the experiences of feeling traumatized by an experience and being unable to let that trauma go because it became a part of my identity. But the only reason it became a part of my identity was because I kept telling the story, either to myself, to other people, or just every day in here reminiscing. You know, every time I did the dishes, I would think about the same thing because I didn't realize that was a thought pattern, which I could have easily changed just by acknowledging, oh my God, every time I do the damn dishes, I think of this stupid fight I had with someone, and just pattern interruption. Start doing the dishes with the other hand. I do this all the time. I am ambidextrous pretty much now, so I can just start doing something I'm used to doing with one hand with the other hand, and I'll stop thinking about a thought pattern. Just try it. It's a really easy way to switch up your thought patterns. Just start doing things with the opposite hand. You'll find it at first very challenging, and that's the point, because now your mind has something to focus on. And similarly, like if you have a bad mood every time you take a certain route to work or something, just take a different route. This isn't rocket science, but the mind is like, oh, but that would be inconvenient. Like, no, it's fine. Just get up 5 minutes earlier and take a longer route, and you'll have a different day. Your whole day will be different. It's just pattern interruption. And honestly, it's not hard. It's all very easy, but that's what we're doing when we keep telling stories and taking stock and trying to come to conclusions and lessons and blah, blah, blah. We're just too focused on something that we don't need to be. Just zoom out and focus in on something else. You can create a whole new life for yourself in not long at all. Different careers, different relationships, different locations, different body, different lifestyles, and none of it matters. It doesn't make you a good or a bad person. If you stick it out with someone for your whole life, the dedication to a relationship doesn't mean anything, especially if it's a bad relationship, like as far as it's causing you to feel really bad most of the time. That's your choice. You're just choosing to do that. You're choosing to be selfish in every other regard except this one thing. But you don't have to burn bridges to do it. So it's like you don't need to be done with something. You can just back up from it and focus on something else. And it's really about withdrawing your own emotional and mental attachment to something. But there's no action required. It's actually just removing your focus and focusing on something else. It's really easy, and it leaves all of your options and possibilities open. So I hope that makes sense to you guys. I hope that helps you out a little bit. And I'll see you soon. I love you. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.